Welcome back to your home of free agency news as we roll towards NBL 26. This is the marketplace. If it's happening, if it's being spoken about, if it's on the whiteboards of teams, this is the show that you are going to hear about it. I'm Jack Heverin, the two men who know every single morsel of information going on during free agency. Olgun Ulich from ESPN.com.au, the best newsbreaker in Australian basketball, and the man responsible for Hool's hearing, Pete Hooley from NBL.com.au, joining us. Just before we dive into Melbourne United, which is the focus of our episode today, would be fair to say that our episode from a couple of days ago around Paddy Mills has just got people starting to think a little bit.
I mean, it's Paddy Mills. It's the name, right? There's a reason why the Matthew Dellavedova sweepstakes was so exciting. There's a reason why when Bryce Cotton is about to become a free agent, that it's something that we talk about a lot. When these big names are sort of on the periphery, we have to talk about them. They are options for teams, and it is reasonable to think that the audience will also find that very, very interesting.
And the reason why we're happy to talk about it is because there's more than a 0% chance.
Yes.
If it was just flat out that he signalled he's not coming back this year, we would have moved on. There might have been one little quote mentioned about it, but that combined with how patient teams are being, which we spoke about in that episode, of seeing where all the other marquee free agents land and imports land, and say, hey, a lot of other teams outside of Sydney and Illawarra are taking their time, so we can afford that. And if Paddy then becomes available, well, we might start to shift course and see what we can do to bring him in.
We've been going through the teams as they sit at the moment with their signings, with their depth charts and what it looks like. Today we're going to focus in a little bit on Melbourne United. Of course, you can go back and watch all of our previous episodes for our breakdowns of the teams so far. But Melbourne are one of those teams that are showing patience, that are not in a rush. Here is their depth chart as it stands right now. I guess what we haven't seen for quite a few years with Melbourne, you two, is gaps here, here and here. Normally they are going the two import game with a local marquee. Things just look a little bit different right now for Melbourne. It's not a bad thing, it just looks different.
Well, I think in recent years we've seen Dean Vickerman go down that local path and go very local heavy. And so we've seen Matthew Dellavedova's there, and now that cycle of Melbourne United has ended. And so now they have to pivot and go a different direction. Now Pete and I have a good idea of who's going to be filling this power forward spot. It will be a local, and it will be Finn Delany. That is our expectation. But those other spots, we haven't seen United really go down that high-level import path with those guys, with those spots, and it feels like this is the year where Dean Vickerman feels as though they should pivot into that area.
Pete, the obvious question, and I know it's one that a lot of fans are leaving in the comments section for all of our stuff about Melbourne, is why not Ian Clark there? Like, that seems such a logical, easy one for player and for team. Is there a reason why they haven't done that deal yet?
I think because they're going down the three import path for the first time in a while, that deal is not done. There is mutual interest there, from what I'm told, from Melbourne United and Ian Clark to come to some sort of agreement. And a reason I say they're being a little patient with it is there's no surprise that they're going to need that kind of dynamic centre, that really impactful centre on the offensive end and defensive end to really anchor that on both ends of the floor. But to have that kind of really impact guard in the shooting guard spot that can be versatile, play alongside Chris Goulding as well, them to wait to see who that is, right? You can put Ian Clark in there. If that's the path you want to go down, can you start Ian Clark? We saw that how unbelievable he was in the postseason. You can absolutely have Ian Clark. If you find a better suited backup option to be a combo guard, because we saw Dash Daniels there as a next star, his opportunities will probably continue to grow throughout the course of the season. But if you find a better suited backup the way that the rest of your roster is going to shake out, then maybe that's the path you go down with Ian Clark. Say, hey, let's come to agreement for you to be one of our starters. If you go and find someone else to be that starting guard, maybe you turn around to Ian Clark and say, hey, it's going to be a very similar role than you've had in recent years. 6th man of the year, leading contender. If we need you to start, we know you're more than capable of doing it. That's where I think the patience is coming from, but there is mutual interest there to return.
Yeah, there's no reason to rush into someone like an Ian Clark. He's not cheap by any means, but he's not, as far as price-wise, he's not at the same level of starting some of those starting import point guards that we see. And so there is a world where they can fill that starting guard spot with a high-level import of some sort, and say to Ian Clark, hey, like, it might be a slight pay cut, it might be what you're on, but it might be a different role. And so Dean Vickerman is doing a good job of keeping that option open, seeing if they can maybe get a high-level player and Ian Clark. Like, that would be the dream.
And Ian Clark's signing normally has come, in recent seasons, come a bit later on in the piece for that reason. And he's signalled again his intention he'd like to be able to come back to the NBL. He's a very well-loved character, both on and off the floor, around the league, but specifically at Melbourne United, both from an on-court and off-court perspective as well. So it's definitely one to continue to watch, but I think the patience isn't alarming at all.
Let's talk Finn Delany in that case. You both have mentioned him previously, Olgun. You've just mentioned him again. It seems as though that deal's getting pretty close.
Yeah, those talks are in the very advanced stages. It is to a point where if this doesn't happen by the end of the month, it would be unbelievably surprising. So we have a very strong expectation that this is a signing that will get done pretty imminently. And it's someone that Dean Vickerman sort of started to go after right as free agency opened. It was sort of the number one target at that 4 spot. Obviously, Vickerman went from Jack White to Luke Travers back to Jack White, and now he gets to put Finn Delany at sort of a different style of player. I spoke to another GM today about it, and he's sort of like, think of the Mason Peatling, Carl Bowen type. Finn Delany's sort of like the final evolution of that sort of guy. He's not quite the like NBA talent that Jack White or Luke Travers is as far as the adjacent NBA guy, but he's sort of like the do-it-all, hard worker guy that I think fits under what Vickerman wants to do.
Didn't think we'd get a Pokemon analogy out of it, but I'm happy to run with it. And I
don't know what that is. So if it happened, I didn't know about it.
I think that's exactly where we're at, though, in terms of what Finn Delany can bring. And we've been on this, as you said, for the last 5 weeks. This isn't news to us. We've been understanding there has been that open conversation, getting closer and closer until eventually, hopefully, they get that deal done and locked away. But I think he'd be a great piece for them. I really do. I've spoke about it in probably 3 weeks ago with his relationship with Dean Vickerman, the way Melbourne United play. I think we're going to get the best Finn Delany version that we probably haven't seen in the recent years when he was in the NBL for numerous reasons, obviously being part of some tough breakers years when he was there. But I think that combined with the way that United want to play, we're going to see the very best of Finn Delany if they can get that locked away. And that's a really good, strong piece to have as a local, and then you fill it with imports and they'll be around the mark.
And let me say this, there's been a lot of high-level local players who have just slowly left the league. For one reason or another, they found jobs in the NBA. They found high-level EuroLeague jobs. You think of Jack McVeigh, Will McDowell-White, Joe Lual-Chua Jr., Yanni Wetzel. It is cool. We're assuming this gets done. It is cool to see one of those guys come back to the NBL when they're still playing at a high level.
Does the signing of Finn Delany, if we work on the assumption that it will happen, does that change the thinking, or what sort of thinking goes on now about the player that will be next to him in the 5 spot, or are Melbourne already pretty clear with what they want in that role?
From what I understand, that'll be a high-level centre. That still feels like the indication. I don't think you can put a ton of offensive load on someone like Finn Delany. You do want to have a higher level centre to be that sort of target on the offensive end especially.
And it's going to have to be more of a playmaking big too, as well as we know the defensive-minded Dean Vickerman, the way he likes to play on that end of the floor. But it was probably one of their big Achilles heels in the Championship Series was the lack thereof of being able to throw it in and make the defenses shift. And because of that, because the time they threw it into either Marcus Lee or Rob Lowe, where you've got guys like Wayne Swakler-Bullock, Dave O'Hickey, who were just glued to Ian Clark and Chris Golding, it was hard for them to kind of get some clean looks without that interior offensive presence. So they'll get some sort of dynamic import. And as we said, it looks like they're going to go for 3 imports this year, which they haven't had for some time, because you go back at the Jock Landales, the Joe Luala-Chuls, combined with those marquee levels. Mitch McCarron's back a few years ago as well with Delhi, Jack White. They've always had those high levels. Obviously, Finn Delany would be one of those high-level guys, maybe not to the marquee level, but still to have those 3 imports, it's going to be a big shift of what we've seen in recent years.
Yeah, 2 things. Firstly, I do think Finn Delany I think he will demand a marquee level contract. So that's something that will be there. And you have to understand that the United was in the Sam Froling sweepstakes, at least very early on. Yep. They were one of the teams that were prepared to show a ton of interest in Froling. So that gives you an indication of the type of player and the level of player that they were ready to put at that 5 spot. And that's notwithstanding the signing of Finn Delany.
The other aspect about Melbourne that's worth exploring is we've spoken about their vacancies in the import position. What they have done, and we saw in the depth chart earlier, is they've built their bench out, which for teams in recent years, that seems to be Sydney, one example that they've made that a priority almost, is to build the bench out with locals first and then add the cream on top of the cake later. So Melbourne have got that. Fabian Krislovic coming in from Tasmania is nice. They've already got Kyle Bowen, and we have spoken about Tom Wilson a little bit on Marketplace as well. He's going to be this kind of unknown scoring punch that will be very interesting to watch, I think.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing him back in the league, right? He's playing very, very well in the NBL 1 South, putting up some massive numbers, doing a bit of everything, ripping down rebounds, getting assists, scoring at a high rate, shooting the 3 ball. And the way he continues to get his feet wet, I mean, he had a long time away from the game. He's only going to continue to improve over the course of the season. But that comment you make about building the bench out, just go back over the last 5 years. When Sydney went back-to-back, that bench unit continued to roll over. The Illawarra Hawks from last year, we saw that bench unit from prior. The Tasmania Jack Jumpers in between that, we saw the bench unit roll over. Super important, and it's no surprise teams are going down that path.
Yeah, and you look at the way he plays too. He's not just a backup point guard. If you watch him in the NBL 1 South, you'll see him play the bulk of his minutes at the point. Andrew Gaze does not like to take Tom Wilson off the floor for the Melbourne Tigers.
Nor should he.
100%. but he's also someone who's showing to be a high-level shooter, and so you can plug and play him in different areas in that guard spot. And I also think it is a bit of a gamble where you bring someone in who hasn't played at the professional level in a really long time. Obviously, we know what the talent was probably going to be as someone who was a really high-level recruit growing up, but we have to wait and see what Tom Wilson looks like. I would bet on him being a really solid player and someone who you can play in meaningful moments, but we have to wait and see. And I think the same can be said about Dash Daniels, their next star. And so they have these two guards off the bench who we don't know what they're going to look like. They both could be awesome, but we just don't know that yet. I think that's intriguing from what Vickerman's done.
And that's why it seems they're going to go down and get a backup import combo guard, right? Yeah. Just because of that inexperience in those big moments. And as I said, Dash Daniels, his opportunity will grow steadily throughout the year. Understanding where he's at, still only 17 years old, but where he can potentially get to. Tom Wilson as well, having so far out of the game. So someone who can play meaningful minutes and handle the ball. And again, if we're just speaking hypothetically, if Ian Clark is that starting guard, he can handle the ball as well if you need to at times. So that kind of versatility in those guard spots seems the way that Melbourne United will head down. And you've got Chris Golding, who doesn't seem to be slowing down anytime soon. Potentially Finn Delany, as we said, if that gets done, add those other pieces, and it's really solid.
And Tanner Krebs looks like one that might take a bit more of a jump. His back end of last season, including the playoffs, was quite meaningful for Melbourne.
Yeah, and I think of all of those front court spots, and I go from Tanner Krebs to Kyle Bowen to Fabian Krislovic. All these guys are floor risers. These are all safe options, and these are all guys who I think you can play off the bench in meaningful moments in a playoff series. So they feel really safe. When it comes to the guards, there's a lot of optionality there. You have different sorts of players there. We don't know what they're going to look like just yet, but there are a lot of different avenues that Dean Vickerman could potentially go down. But like you said, Tanner Krebs, it feels like he could leverage the end of his NBL 25, that postseason, into a really strong start to the new season. And I like how safe the positions 3 through 5 are off the bench for this team. It feels like the floor is really high from those guys.
And Krislovic gives them a lot in terms of he shoots the ball and plays defense at a really high rate at the level. So Marcus Lee was an elite defender for them last year, and Rob Lowe could stretch the floor. So he kind of gives them both in that. Not the rim protection of Marcus Lee or a lob threat. So that's one side of it. And Tanner Krebs has the ability to also slide down and guard the 4 and play the 4 if needed, if teams are going to play small ball, which historically in recent years, teams aren't afraid to throw out a small ball lineup. I think he's primed for a big NBL 26.
So Melbourne are probably one of those teams that you two are going to encounter at Summer League when you head over there in a few weeks' time. I think that the takeaway out of this is the import 5. It feels like if Melbourne are really going to make a splash leading into NBL 26, it's going to be in that spot.
And we can rule it out now because last year I was on the Tyler Cook watch. That's not going to happen this year. They've thrown it up, got shut down. We can move past that. But some sort of dynamic, really, really impactful big, it seems like he's going to be the leading target.
Yeah, this is the team that will probably have 5 combined marquees and imports. So probably 2 marquees, and I'd look at Chris Golding and Finn Delany as those 2 guys. That's what it's going to look like, and then 3 imports on top of that. So obviously they can figure out what they do as far as their cap sheet and then who they market and who they don't. But it seems like for the first time in a while, Dean Vickerman is going to go down that 3 import route.
Looks like they're going to be pretty strong again, Melbourne United, which is par for the course in this league. Great work, both of you. Thank you for joining us on The Marketplace. And of course, thanks to you for joining us on The Marketplace as well. You can follow both of these learned gentlemen on social media for the latest news and information. You can head to nbl.com.au. That's where it's all happening. And of course, download the NBL app as well for all the latest news and information. We will catch you next time on The Marketplace.